The title of the talk tonight is Views and Opinions That Frighten and Confine Us. I'm not sure that's a good title, but anyway, that's what the title is. And as you might have guessed from the meditation, we'll be looking a bit at this thinking mind and how to work with it a little bit more skillfully. So I want to kind of outline the Buddha's teaching about thought and working with thought. And I'll tell you a couple of stories that I hope will give us an experience of that. And then we'll work a little bit with how to work with it. Joseph Goldstein said one time in a talk, he said he ended his meditation, his sit, and when he was teaching one time, and he just shook his head and said, "The mind has no shame." You know? And I think we all know what he means, as we kind of deal with all this activity, all this mental activity of the mind. And the mind is constantly offering interpretations and views and opinions about pretty much everything. And so how to work with that. I think about a time recently when I had just a 3-word difficult encounter with a friend. And, it sort of went from there to there to there to there in my own mind. And again, we all know how we can take just this tiny little bit of data, this tiny little experience, and kind of have it really become a moment of suffering. And that's what the Buddha was speaking of. When he talks about being born again, he's speaking about being born again into suffering in that way. That we have an experience and then it kind of snowballs into something that really is difficult and challenging. The Buddha, in his one of the suttas, cautions against indulging in what he called a thicket of views. And I just love that phrase, a thicket. We know how it is to be kind of caught in a thicket in our minds, or a tangle. He says a thicket of views, a wilderness of views, a contortion of views, a writhing of views, a fetter of views. It is accompanied by suffering and does not lead to disenchantment, dispassion, cessation, to full awakening. This thicket of views, this writhing of views. I love it. I love all those words because they just sort of resonate with me. It's like, oh yeah, I know those places with what the mind does. And that he taught that accomplishment means letting go of the suffering, letting go of the ways that we fall into that thicket and then struggle and suffer with it. He isn't saying don't have any views. I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go along. So he's not saying, make the mind stop, which is what we sometimes interpret it to mean. That's not really what he's saying. In the Metta Sutta, he says this is said to be the sublime abiding by not holding fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. And there again, he means the world of suffering. And so by not holding fixed views is really our inquiry. And when I think of it, I think of letting go of a rope, like we're in a tug of war. And somehow this fixed view is this sort of tug of war in my own mind, and somehow letting go of my end of the rope. My first little story, many of you know that I am lucky enough to spend some time each winter in Bali. And I was walking along the street in Bali one morning, and I saw a woman carrying eggs. And I watched the mind give the opinion that that's not the way to carry eggs. And the reason it was, the reason. It's not really the reason it was, but the stimulus was the woman was carrying 180 eggs on her head. Um, and I just sort of looked and I thought, I just like the mind just immediately said, that's not the way to carry eggs. That was a fairly easy one to put down. I just did what you did. I kind of laughed at the mind's opinion about that. It's like, sweetheart, you are in Bali, not in New York City. This is how they do it here. She was really carrying 180 eggs on her head. So anyway, it was not too hard to let go of that one, but we all know places where it is a little bit harder to let go. So it's not a problem that the thought arises. The thought arises out of our DNA, the brain, just because of our humanity, tries to make sense of things, and tries to make sense of things based on how I have made sense of things in the past. So DNA plus conditioning. So it's just how it goes. It's just what happens. So again, we could misunderstand and think that somehow the challenge is to get rid of those things. The brain, there's something wrong with me if the brain says that's not how to carry eggs. So there's nothing wrong. It just comes out of, my conditioning. It's not how I carry eggs, please. But that somehow hanging on to that, you can see how if I hang on to that, and then I start to kind of go on the warpath about those people who carry eggs the wrong way, that we could cause some suffering, if not for other people, for myself, because now I've got some kind of burning agenda about how things are supposed to be. So the Buddha invites us to inquire. He saw that in a tiny little moment, that tiny little moment between me seeing the woman walking across the street, there's this little split second where the mind goes through this whole cascade of experience that we then take to be real. There are actually 5 separate things that occur at blinding speed that kind of plop us right into the middle of that. It's been referred to as kind of 5 frames of a movie. How they could just kind of zip through. And it seems real. It seems like it's all one thing. But it's actually 5 separate things that happen. The first one is just contact. Our senses make contact with something. In that case, my eyes made contact with something out there. I saw something. So we can make contact with any of our senses, our eyes, our ears, our skin, our taste, our smell, and also thinking. We can make contact because the mind just kind of rolls along. It kind of does its thing, and it has thoughts. And so that we can make contact with our thinking as well. So the first is contact, and arising right with that contact is generally some kind of feeling tone. It's pleasant to see that. It's unpleasant to see that. In my case, it was, huh? It was like if I kind of look and see what the experience was, it was neither pleasant nor unpleasant. Well, actually, I'll take that back. It was more unpleasant in the sense of being confusing. There was something that was different from what I expected to see. So it's pleasant, it's unpleasant, or neutral. And those first 2 events happen almost simultaneously. I will say, simultaneously. Let's say they're, for all practical purposes, they happen simultaneously. I see, I hear, and even if it's not conscious, often it's not conscious, there's a sense contact, and then there's some quality of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral that gets us going in some direction. In that case, my sense contact got me going in an aversion direction, saying, no, that's not right. That's, So it kind of gets us into some kind of momentum about it. Confusion can get us into the unpleasantness of I don't know what to do here. I don't know what to do about this. So those first 2, contact and then some kind of feeling tone. And then the third thing that happens, almost just right, and it just happens boom, 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 is perception. We name it somehow. So in my mind, woman, now I've kind of named this experience, woman carrying eggs, 3 words. Woman carrying eggs. And so we name it. There's a perception. This is what's going on, the mind says. We hear a sound, bird, singing. We hear a sound. The mind says, heat system, running. So there's a perception. There's a it's this quality about it. And here we start to get into a bit of trouble, because we're naming things and maybe we don't really know quite what's going on. But we get into a bit of trouble at that 3rd step. And then the 4th step is the step of storytelling, where the mind takes that perception and then kind of weaves this kind of elaborate soap opera often around it. I think about the little exchange I had with my friend. And, so there's this little unpleasant, she was kind of sharp with me, didn't like it, unpleasant. And then I name it sharp, and then I can see the mind go into all sorts of narratives about what's wrong with her, what's wrong with me, what's wrong with the situation, what needs to happen. And now we can really see how we get into these thickets. Because perception, and then there's the story that goes with it. And then there's consciousness. All of that conditions the state of consciousness that we're in. So these 5 things just boom, happen so quickly. The Buddha called it a magic show. And one of his analogies was like when you take a flaming torch and you kind of swing it around, it seems like it's, a whole thing, but really it's just the movement. So it's really just the movement of the mind, but we inhabit it as though it's a real thing. It's all the normal state of the body and brain through millennia of evolution have been programmed to offer. There is contact, senses see, hear, eyes hear, or eyes see, ears hear, body sense, noses smell, tongues taste, brains think. Animals in the African savanna who didn't have these exquisitely sensitive skills didn't survive long. And we wouldn't have either. Our ancestors wouldn't either. Okay. So immediately co-arising a sense of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. We gravitate toward the pleasant, away from the unpleasant, and kind of struggle with those neutral things. There's so much data. Like an efficient bodyguard, it flashes instant assessments. It's this, it's that. Has all sorts of opinions formed over lifetimes. Our own, our ancestors, our cultures. It's this, it's that. And all of which condition our states of consciousness. And to a certain extent, it's all well and good that the brain can do this. Ajahn Chah says, but the mind passes through these changes so rapidly that we can't keep up with them. It's the same as when you fall from a tree. Before you know it, thud, you've hit the ground. Actually, you've passed many branches and twigs on the way, but you couldn't count them. You couldn't remember them as you passed them. You just fall and then thud. So I want to tell you another story here. It's a longer, a little bit more involved story about something that happened when I was in Bali. I always come home from Bali with stories. But before I do, I just would invite you to orient, as we did in the meditation, orient to your body. You can just sort of notice how the body is. Here's the body sitting. Here we are in this room. We're all here. We're together. There's the chair. There's the feeling quality of your clothing. So here we are. So this is the internal experience that you have right here now as you anticipate this story I'm going to tell you. Okay? Okay. In Bali every day I go out for coffee, and I was in my favorite coffee shop, which in Bali is just very busy, and people are calling to one another in a dozen languages. There's just all this commotion and all this language, and there's um, a lot of traffic outside, a lot of traffic noise. Um, and it's a beautiful day. The sun is shining. It's hot. It was much hotter in Bali than it was here. It's hot, so just lots going on. I'm settled down at my computer. I like to write in coffee shops, and so I was working on my writing. John Denver was singing about West Virginia on the music loop. I was just like, that is, somehow in foreign countries they do that, and I just don't know. It's like, that is just so totally incongruous. John's, country, West Virginia, okay, fine. So all of this is going on, all of this data, and I'm kind of not tuned in to any of it. I'm at my computer and working away. And into the coffee shop walk three men dressed in black. I'm going to invite you to watch the mind as I tell you this story. Okay? And you might already notice something about it. Okay? So just watch. I just want to walk through this so you can watch how this happens. Three men dressed in black. Okay? Two of them walk into the back room, and one of them quietly sits down at the table, directly across from me. I watch the mind. How you doing? Doing okay? And places his machine gun on the table, aimed at me. How's your mind doing? So just watch it. Just watch it, Just watch what the mind does with that data. All you are doing is hearing my words. I'm here, I'm safe, you're here, you're safe, we're all good. I'll tell you the rest of the story in a bit. But we can watch how the mind goes from sound, the sound of my voice, words, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, perception, three men in black, back room, where's, story. Have you got stories going? Yeah. So this is what the mind does. This is what the mind does. It does it all day, every day. And this is how we get caught over and over and over again into suffering, into unwholesome action, into unwholesome mental activities, into all kinds of struggle. Have we fallen through the branches yet? Is there a thud? Is there any kind of concern about what the end of the story is? Clearly, I did not get killed by the machine gun. We're good there, right? So just notice how this mind functions with respect to simple data. We can get into all sorts of trouble. The brain, determined to avoid the unfamiliar, the unknown, determined to make us safe, has no shame. It will tell any kind of a story, quite simply and enthusiastically, and faithfully and be faithful and zealously not here, and furthermore, wrong. Just like I was with the eggs, It's just like I wasn't there with that person. I was wrong. It was a perfectly fine way to carry the eggs. The mind, as it moves through those sequences, can and does often simply make assumptions and draw conclusions that may or may not be either true or useful. We can be pulled into reactivity, into drama, into a cascade of not so wholesome responses, into judgments. And then we can be pulled into a cascade of reactivity and drama about the cascade of reactivity and drama about the emotions that come up, about the cascade of reactivity and drama, about the cascade of reactivity and drama, and we haven't even gotten into unskillful action about it, you know. So you can just see how things, just kind of flump into all kinds of suffering and in all kinds of reactivity that actually perpetuate suffering. We could take something really simple, like somebody cuts me off in traffic. Same thing. Very same thing happens, huh? Somebody carrying eggs on her head. Somebody cuts me off in traffic. Unpleasant. It's this. And then we're off to the races about it. It's how the mind works. We know this well as we read of assessments of others' assessments of those who are different by race, religion, gender identity, class, able-bodiedness. We see all sorts of tragic results of this, not the least with all sorts of living while black experiences. In 2018, you're all very familiar of the kinds of tragic outcomes of not understanding that process. Police been called on African Americans for selling lemonade, for sleeping, for golfing slowly, for waiting for a friend, campaigning door to door, moving into a new house, mowing the wrong lawn, riding in a car with a white grandmother, not waving while leaving an Airbnb, wearing a backpack that brushed against a white woman. That was only a small section of the list that I encountered. But it's the same thing. There's a little bit of data, and somebody moves quickly into that thud of experience, acts on it in an unskillful way. This is not, however, about the police. I'm not talking about the police. I'm using it as an example about us, about me with the lady with the eggs. It's what happens, and if we don't understand it and don't work with it, all kinds of unskillful things can happen. The mind has no shame. So this is how it is, and now what? Okay. That's how the mind works. Our practice is to slow it all down and to cultivate a sturdy capacity of awareness to observe the arisings and simply see. To inquire, to not know, what is this, what is needed. One of the practices, we'll see if we can get to it, maybe we will, maybe we won't. I did it a little bit in the meditation, inviting you to kind of notice, when we're thinking, we're probably off in some kind of narrative. So we're off at step 4, very often. And so the invitation is, can you step it back? What was the perception that came before that? And more important, what was the feeling quality and the moment of sensory contact? Because coming back to the moment of sensory contact and the feeling quality, the invitation of our practice is to cultivate the capacity to be with that. To let go of addiction to the perception, to let go of addiction to the story, to keep coming back to the direct experience, what's happening here now with this, and it will reveal what's needed. What's needed. How is it here now, in this present moment, in this mind? How are we doing with my machine gun story? Are we doing okay? Yeah? You want to hear more? What's interesting, So back to the coffee shop. I perked up. I had been actually kind of lost in a story. I was trying to write in Bali, and it was just one of those periods where I could not put two words together. So I'm in the coffee shop and I'm having a story about how hopeless I am about writing. So it did pull me out of that one, you know. And Teresa isn't here. I emailed Teresa, and she happened to catch it right away. I said, "You won't believe what's happening right now." I said, "I am dying to take a picture, but I don't dare." Um, that there is this man sitting here with his machine gun pointing at me. So, but it perked me up out of the kind of mental doldrums, the other story that I was lost in, and now I'm here in this present. But I was actually pretty present with it because it just seemed so absurd. John Denver is singing about West Virginia, and there's this guy here with this machine gun. It's like, what is going on here? So, if we observe carefully, we watch this process of our minds, we can notice how very challenging it is. Maybe you noticed that during the meditation. Just how very challenging we can be. We can be. I was doing it with mine, and it was like only 3 or 4 steps removed, but it was just really kind of you just kind of have this thud, in this place, and then it can be really hard to say, okay, what was the thought that precipitated that thought, and indeed, what was the sensation? It can be really challenging, and again, that's normal. Dan Siegel talks about left mode processing, which is the brain's capacity to make sense of things. Um, and he says it seeks to make assessments of right and wrong and appears to have little tolerance for ambiguity. Contradictory information or confusing information is not handled well. Um, Conflicting points of view may be quickly oversimplified in an effort to resolve the problem and come up with a logical solution the left brain considers to be correct. So the left brain, this logical part of our brain, doesn't like this, to come back and just be with the experience, to slow it down and be with the experience. Its job is to kind of make sense of things. So it's hard. It's hard. So if you find yourself in your meditation practice, getting caught in those places, it's because it's hard. It's not you. Ajahn Amaro says, develop the training to withdraw attention from the object and see what the body is doing, particularly using the breath. And then take a moment to notice how good the breath feels. And actually, I kind of did that as I'm sitting in the coffee shop and I'm writing the email. It's like, I just thought it was funny. That my actual experience was just the oddness of it. That just, it's like, I didn't really expect this to be happening this morning. As I watched, I had a little bit of help because the man sitting at the table with his machine gun on the table pointing at me casually pulled out his smartphone and started scrolling through it. So I kind of had a sense that maybe he wasn't going to use the machine gun. So we can, we can sort of, okay, now check in with your body about that. Is it possible to just let go of whatever story you had created about that machine gun? And for me, in a way, it's not possible to let it go because I just thought it was so funny. I thought, I have to find a way to talk about this. So here you are. Because it just was so, it was just so discrepant. The whole thing was just so absurd. So they were there, I gathered, to collect the day's receipts. So I think that was what I think that was what they were there for. I'm sure that was what they were there. Um, you want to try it for? Let's do a little meditation. Let's do a little meditation. Um, bring bring awareness to something that I mentioned a number of things. I mentioned traffic. I mentioned a little moment with a friend that that there was just this little that kind of had me falling through the branches. I mentioned a story. Maybe there's some residue of the story. I don't know. But just bring your awareness to something where the mind is kind of getting is a little is a little churned about it. Something that was difficult or is difficult, and the mind is a little churned about it. Um, where there's this sort of and furthermore. And just set that aside for a moment and just bring your awareness to the body, this body sitting here. You're here, you're in this room, seated in this chair, this heating system making noise, these lights, my voice. Find the breath, and especially any quality, any quality of goodness in the breath. It's what we did in the meditation. I invited you to bring awareness to gratitude or any quality of goodness. And now, within that awareness, bring your attention to maybe some thoughts that you have about something. It might be, I don't know, but maybe not the world's most difficult thing. It might be the story I just told. It might be some difficulty with your computer today. It might be um, a little exchange with a friend. It might be a politician, um, that you have some thoughts about. And see if you can look back. What was the thought that came before that one? Again, don't get into a tangle with it. If you can't find it, it's okay. And what was the thought that came before that one? With my friend, I have thoughts about what's going on with them. Okay, what came on before this is I don't like this. And what came before that was some constriction in my body. Unpleasant. So just see if you can trace it back till you get to a body sensation. And maybe just an experience of contact. Maybe contact, maybe not. For me, with my machine gun friend, I can kind of trace it back to seeing, and then that initial moment of, what's this? And look to see if you could simply allow the experience of the body, the experience of the sense, the sense experience itself, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, and maybe kind of boring. Sometimes when things are neutral, they're boring. Sometimes if they're neutral, they're confusing. And just see what's the tone, the quality of the actual experience. See if you might give that actual experience a bit more permission. Just this. So our spiritual practice is a journey of learning to discern the mind's activity and to cultivate wholesome skill with it all, coming back to our direct experience. Um, it's the middle way that the Buddha discovered, not rejecting form or the activity of the mind, but not becoming identified with it. Seeing it arise, letting it go. Often if we simply observe the arising in our own bodies, it just fades away. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But the challenge is to not cling to it, water it, nourish it, believe it, inhabit it as though it was real. My assessment of the woman carrying eggs. It's not true. It's not true. Neither is it particularly helpful or wholesome. As we strive to bring the Dharma to our daily life and to our meditation practice, we can inadvertently engage in wars against others, against ourselves, for having this process happen. So it's not about having a war with ourselves, but about sort of gradually untangling ourselves from this thicket. We can use whatever arises to learn to pause and see what is the direct experience. Mark Nepo has a poem in which he talks about becoming a soft and sturdy home in which things can land. So this awareness, our awareness, can be a soft and sturdy home in which it all can land, and we can discern what is worthy of our attention, what needs attention. Do I need to do anything about this experience in the coffee shop? No, not really, other than maybe laugh at it. Do I need to do anything about the lady with the eggs? No, not really, other than to not be addicted to my view about it. Do I need to do anything about my experience with my friend? As I look, no, not really. Maybe, I might. I might say, might need to say, hey, when you said that, it hurt my feelings. It's possible. So it isn't like it's automatic that I don't need to do anything about it. But in that moment, no. When somebody cuts me off in traffic and I get scared or annoyed, do I need to do anything about it? Maybe, maybe not. But the only way we can know, really, is if we cultivate that capacity to hang out with experience long enough to discern what's going on here and what's needed. To be a soft and sturdy home in which things can land. So, we will stop there. Bless you. You okay with the story? We good? Don't want to leave anybody triggered. Oops. Okay. Blessings.